Hello, everyone. This is Francesco, part of the DevRel team, and we're super excited to bring you. I think this time will be a dynamic, like kind of like X space slash like video call, and yeah, we're just super exciting. This time we will speak about everything on chain identity, but I don't want to kind of like take it away. I let everyone introduce themselves, and yeah, you wanna quickly start, Simon.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Francesco. So yeah, I'm Simon. Work at Consensus. I'm one of the co-founders of the Verax attestation registry that's on Linea. But I work with MetaMask and Linea and a whole bunch of other teams at Consensus. I'm delighted to be here to chat about my favorite subject.
Nice, thanks, Simon. Kyle, you wanna go next? Oh, I think we cannot hear you.
Thanks. I
Oh,
was on
yes.
mute to make sure you couldn't hear my
Perfect.
typing. My name's Kyle. It's great to meet you all. I am one of the co-founders of Gitcoin. We just recently spun Passport, Gitcoin Passport, out of Gitcoin. So now also one of the co-founders of Passport, and have the opportunity to work in the identity space and public goods funding space. So excited to chat with you all about kind of online reputations, identities, and reputations, and ways to sort of prove unique humanity in hopefully non-doxing formats. So thanks
So
again for
cool.
having me.
Cool. Exciting to have you, Kyle. I think it's one of the first time I see you like kind of like face to face. I always see Kevin like around, but it's great to actually like see you and connect also like after for Bangkok. Cool. Joshua, you wanna go next?
Yeah. Hi everyone. It's very nice to to have on space with you guys. I'm Joshua, one of the founding member of ZK Pass, taking care of the strategy here. And so what ZK Pass does is we are doing like a ZKTLS basically. So we are trying to bridge all those private data from the web to a Web3 as attestations. So really excited to talk about today about the identity side, Web3 identities in general. Yeah, it's just great honor to talk to you guys. Yeah.
That's so exciting. And ZK Pass has been super crucial for all the kind of like linear on-chain identity onboarding. So we're super excited. And I see you're like calling from a great pool. So it's also great to see some good weather. I'm joking. But yeah, and Iskander, you made it. Super excited to have you here and to have some ENS presence. How are you today?
Thanks.
So what's you want to quickly introduce yourself, what you're doing at ENS? I mean, obviously a lot of people know you
Sure.
because you're yes, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Iskander. So I'm head of product at ENS. ENS is a protocol that allows you to create like on-chain domains or off-chain or profiles. And like how we tend to connect with identity is people, you get your username, your profile that is associated with you on chain, but then there's also a layer of ENS that allows you to effectively attach metadata or point to other services. So ENS tends to interop between a lot of different identity providers. So as on-chain identity becomes more and more powerful, ENS wants to be right in the middle of that, like helping enable all these different use cases.
That's super exciting. It's actually a great intro to segue of giving a little bit context of this kind of like dynamic video space. As kind of like everybody that is tuning in, so this kind of like quick hour, hopefully we're like also spending less time, but we will talk a little bit about everything on-chain identity. Obviously, we know and we need more kind of like trustworthy and user centric approach to identity. We kind of like know in Web3 on kind of like traditional web identity, everything is centralized, so kind of like we're not really in control of our data, and like user, let's say, decentralized solution, the IDs and attestation are kind of like enabling a much more control on the end user side, but also like on the decentralization of the tech stack. And the goal really like is to kind of touch different point on kind of like today's discussion. So we want to kind of like understand the challenges that both users and developers today on the on-chain identity side, and why it's so important for Web3 users. We want to touch a little bit like the kind of like how the linear ENS and the other tooling kind of simplify this process and this kind of like creation and management of the digital identity. And then we kind of like want to understand a bit more high level the role of privacy and kind of interoperability between like kind of like on-chain identities and on the security side, and then kind of like at the last point is seeing what's going on in kind of more on the future side, right? So what is the role, but most important, what are the exciting things that everybody is seeing here that can empower much more like developers to build on-chain identity stack on a more kind of like decentralized way. So let's actually start with the first part, and everybody feel free to chime in if you have any question, you want to just jump in also, like if you want to follow the flow. I'm just coming at you with like some kind of like not even spicy question like I'm doing usually, just mostly like, you know, let's start with something. But let's actually touch on a little bit on the importance and challenges on-chain identity that either developers and people has today. Why we need much more on-chain identity stack, and why this is so important for both developer and for Web3 users. And that's a question for everybody. Feel free to respond here.
Simon, I feel like maybe as the person who kicked off much of this in Verax, would love to like hear your vision, and we can talk about how we fit into that.
Okay, yeah. I think one thing I would nitpick on is that we don't necessarily need like on-chain identity, but on-chain has to be like a component of it. But we do need identity as a primitive, a suite of tools and primitives that developers can use. Like when you go back to the original design of the internet, and I'm talking like way back to like DARPANET, you know, and Richard Lidlicker, people like that. Identity was like a core part of it, and they were saying that like none of this will work without identity, and then somehow it got implemented without like the most important part, and we have TCP and IP and all the rest of it. But then we saw what happened; everything was bolted on afterwards, and now we have the web it is, the state it's in today. And so for Web3, especially on Linea, we recognize that builders need identity primitives to work with to build tools that are really usable by users. And it unlocks all of the really important use cases. So, I mean, obviously, civil resistance and proof of humanity is intrinsically important to dApps and developers. But when we start thinking about use cases like compliance, KYC, AML, KYB, you know, proof of being an accredited investor, like these things are like how the world works. So, like, if we're really going to mature as a space, we absolutely need these capabilities. You know, having access to a user's credit history for under collateralized loans and robust P2P lending markets in a privacy-preserving way is an absolute must. Not to mention security, reducing fraud, you know, reducing scams, phishing, building digital communities or digitally augmented communities, allowing its members to like understand who the community is, establish trust, establish relationships between members of the community, all of that kind of stuff. I could go on. I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir there, but like all of these use cases that I'm listing are like the fundamental component to all of them is identity primitives. And so that's comprised, as I said, of on-chain and off-chain data. For me, verifiable credentials is probably the most powerful form of the most powerful primitive or standard that we have for off-chain data. And I think there's been stuff like Privado ID and the Veramo project, which has helped developers in Web3 to harness that data. Stuff like what ZK Pass are building that enables us to kind of take data from Web2 that's siloed and take it and put it into verifiable credentials or bring it on-chain as attestations. That's going to be a huge unlock as well. And then on-chain registries, of course, play a really important part because that's the bit that is on-chain for anyone to access, that's totally verifiable, and that can be accessed programmatically through smart contracts. So that's a key ingredient as well. I'll just stop.
That's very cool.
What else?
Yeah, no, that's really cool, Simon. I just want to ask like one question for like the common kind of mortals that are here in this chat, like how things are done until kind of like today, like without actually speaking about the kind of like, let's say, public attestation registry, public on-chain, how things are done, like how the KYC will work, like obviously kind of like just to give like an answer, like how things are done today versus how we kind of like envision on a much more like kind of decentralized way.
Yeah, I'll talk about that really quickly, but I'd love to get other people's take on this as well, because it's a really good question. I think, you know, traditionally how things are done is like developers see that maybe they need KYC, right, for regulatory compliance or something like that. And, you know, then they go out shopping for solutions, and they're kind of forced to pick a single solution and buy into that solution. And that gives them like the strongest guarantees that KYC is working properly, because they're trusting this one solution. But it has its downsides. One, they're kind of locked into working with this one vendor, and then they assume the counterparty risk of doing that. Two, from the user's perspective, it's completely fragmented. And I think everyone listening on the call now has this, will like recognize this experience where they go around to like different dApps and they have to redo KYC over and over and over again. And even with a single company, sometimes they use different products, and maybe the on-ramp provider, like one on-ramp provider does KYC with one KYC provider, and then another one will do it with another provider, and it's not a great experience. So I think there's room for improvement there. I think on-chain registries can help, because you can, as a developer, you can tap into this one registry, and then you can access all of the attestations that are issued into that registry. You still have the freedom to decide which ones you want to accept and which ones you don't want to accept, but it allows you to kind of tap in and access all of these different pieces of data. And so we're seeing like Coinbase, for example, they have something like 400, 500,000, I think, attestations issued to EAS and Base. So everyone in the Base ecosystem can access them, which is a really positive step. Similarly, you can see the same thing on Binance, and I think Linea is maybe the leader in this space, because I think in terms of on-chain attestations, they have like Verax is like maybe the biggest in Web3, and it has attestations from all over. Binance, Coinbase is there via ZK Pass, and a whole bunch of other different types of attestations. And again, developers plug in once and they can access them all. So I think that's really helpful, and it's a signal of how the things are changing.
Just super cool. Oh, feel free
Some
to
of what
chime in.
I'll perhaps add on, Simon, that I really appreciate that I know a number of us are exploring now is, as those attestations, as those sort of credentials come on chain, ensuring that users own the ability to share them, have them sort of, whether they're ZK proofed, have them encrypted in a way that, once again, it's sort of non-doxing information that's available. So if I KYC somewhere, I can decide as a user what components of that KYC I share with these dApps. I think is really going to be when this starts to unlock new use cases. So instead of just putting my full passport details on chain somewhere so that someone can reference that or confirm that I've done that, that creates systems of trust. I have to trust this particular group and their AML, or this particular KYC vendor. Trying to remove a lot of that trust and give ownership back to users and sort of decentralize a lot of these trust assumptions, I think is where we're going to start to see trends moving forward, with kind of user-owned proofs where they can verify specific pieces of information and dApps can verify specific pieces of information without revealing too much. So I think we've all sort of heard, the drinking age, whenever you go to the bar, you shouldn't have to show your entire license or passport to the person who's serving you a drink for them to see, where you live or your blood type or whatever that might be. Right now, we don't have a great way on chain of sharing very specific key information out of KYC details to do that. But I think this is one of the things that excites me about the granularity of what's possible with attestations and Verax and other places, is once you do start to verify those things and give users the ability to decrypt and share that by signing messages, it starts to unlock a lot more of those novel use cases around all the things that you just mentioned. I think the holy grail is like under collateralized DeFi loans. But getting to those assumptions, we need just more work in building out kind of the user privacy and the user owned aspect of these things too.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And it goes back to what I was saying about not everything having to be on chain, which, as someone who built an on-chain attestation registry is probably a strange thing to say. But, the trade-off you can think about it is like, being able to selectively disclose exactly what you want to exactly who you want to disclose it is really powerful. And verifiable credentials do that very, very well. And I think it's great that they're getting more acceptance in Web3. The trade-off is, though, that you have to manually do that. So on-chain attestations are great for stuff like smart contracts, for example. If you can put metadata about a smart contract, and shout out to the Open Labels Initiative that are trying to standardize that. A smart contract doesn't have to manually disclose it. It's just there for anybody at any point to access it. So different use cases kind of see different primitives are more useful.
Yeah, that was actually one question a little bit that I had on the trade-off, Simon. And obviously, like I'm kind of always responding that different trade-off a different kind of a use case perspective. And on the use case side, obviously, like is you have much stronger like use case that will push more on-chain identity versus non-off-chain. The other like kind of like question that I had, not just for Passport XYZ, could be also like on the ENS side, Iskander, like how UX obviously like is key right now, and we don't want to kind of like push like user from chain to chain. Like the question always that I had is that how people, especially on chain attestation and kind of like digital identity, they are handling all the interoperability side between chains, right? Kind of like I think that's also like super relevant because users don't want to kind of like start doing a specific like having their kind of identity track record on one side compared to other side, right? And that was one part. And then the other things I'm struggling always like in terms of like on-chain identity, like or general identity recovering. If they get hacked, if something is happening, how they can actually start recovering their kind of like track record identity of could be like proof of humanity. These kind of like two main things I'm always hearing those topics around like panels and general like technical blogs. But feel free to like either answer one of those. I'm rambling a little bit, but I think those are
Yeah.
important.
Cool. And like before I talk about those, just like broadly, I think around like identity and on-chain, I actually think it's one of the hardest parts of the stack to solve for because identity is like quite a nebulous thing. So like when you ask people like identity mean to them, is my KYC data, tagging, identity poses so many parts of it. It can be hard to into challenge of identity is that it's in like specific pilots that's going to look a lot different involving identity feature, right? Because of their processes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something that the on-chain, off-chain can work up pretty well. The next, like around the signing, proof to like evaluate what records you have and stuff is also like not the best user experience. So if you were to compare like Web3 identity solutions to something like Clear, which provides basically like an experience at an airport, it's their thumbprint. I can like give my email and then I'm able to use that like over and over versus like in a Web3 scheme, a lot of times you have to like refresh the data and like prove that you continue to own this. So the UX part of this, I think, is the biggest barrier. I don't think there's a technology barrier anymore. I think it's purely at the UX level. And then one of the challenges that we have at ENS is like if you set a name, you can set up different records and those can point to different places, to different identity services. But like once you lose that name, how do we make sure that your data doesn't get leveraged by somebody else, right? So when a name transfers, all the records drop off of the name, right? So that any new owner who takes the name doesn't have that pre-established identity attached to it, and the new owner can establish a new identity under that same name or profile. So that's like one way we look at tackling it. The other way, and this is more to Simon's point, like everything doesn't have to be on chain. So like right now, when you see like a lot of the ENS names that got released, like subnames that got released, a lot of those implementations were off chain. And what that allows for is like, they have a server that they are operating that like contains effectively the registry. So you can see who owns what name. But what that does is it gives developers like the level of granularity required to set rules around. And this changes, I want these things to happen, right? So a user onboards to my dApp. Let's say they swap $10 in the AMM. They're like an elevated customer at some point. Like I now have identity. I have the ability to like connect that identity to like on-chain activity and start to build like customer profiles, right? Versus like if you're trying to do this purely on-chain, it's actually super difficult to get the state. You're already relying on like, maybe it's too deep, but like if you're relying on index data already, you're already kind of not trusting the chain to some degree. So for us, it makes sense to be like the most core primitive piece, the actual ownership of the identity being kind of like on chain, these registries, and then all functionality that you want to attach to these identities sitting off chain, but be referenced via this, shared on chain state, I think leads to the best UX. And then how to recover from a hack. To be clear, this is not a solved problem in Web 2, so it's not necessarily just for Web 3 to solve, but I think one of the things that Web 3 has the advantage of is like we can actually design our recovery schemes to fit how we want it to be. So, some people want to have like social recovery, right? Some people just want to have like custodial services that like store their information. The point to me about like how to recover from hacks is that the user, should they opt into it, has the opportunity to own and manage their data however they select, and can opt into that responsibility. I think we can easily mimic the like Web 2 layer in terms of safety, and then I think we can enable deeper layers per this kind of like
Yeah, I'm actually super excited on the recovery side. Like we are right now at in Edgeland and Chiang Mai, like pre kind of like DevCon pop-up city, and we have this like bounties on the MetaMask delegation toolkit. Basically, what you can do is creating like as a developer creating specific delegations, and in theory you can also like a use case on like social recovery would be super interesting too, right? So basically like you build your kind of like attestation registry with specific like delegation mechanism on this side, and I think it's will be like one of the strongest like use case, especially on not just account recovery, but also like the social identity recovery side. Because I think I don't know, Simon, if you get this a lot, but in general, like some people like came to me and are saying, hey, if I have this kind of like on-chain identity or general Web3 identity, and I'm losing actually my could be like directly like accesses or something because of something, how I can actually delegate, or how I can new kind of platforms see my my attestation side, right? And right now I don't know how easy it is to do it. I don't know if there are kind of like an answer to that question today.
I mean, so in Verax, we thought about this, and we have proposals. We haven't implemented them yet, but we have proposals that will allow someone to use a DID to have all of their attestations issued to, and then they can just revoke everything at once if their key is lost or compromised. And it does that because DIDs can have multiple keys attached to them, so you can have like a revocation key that you keep separately. So if your main key is compromised, you can revoke everything. That's one way to do it. I think probably a better way to do it though is upstream and using the capabilities of smart contract wallets. So using Safe, using Delegator, and then using robust social recovery. I think that's like the highest guarantee you can get. And to be honest, I think it's better than a lot of the security practices in Web 2 currently. That's what I would say.
So for those of recovery on ZK do, the way we do it is kind of like once the user lost the key or something, and then as a user, they just need to regenerate that proof. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Because of what we do is just, okay, you get a account and all those Web2 accounts, right? And then you log into your account, it generate a proof of any type of identity related informations. So basically, if you lost that proof, okay, you just log into that account, generate it again, and the first one would invalid. So that's basically the way to the recoveries. Yeah.
Yes. That's actually, Joshua, is a good point what you're saying on the recovery side. And I wanted also to point out, like, I'm a big fan of like, the POH, like the proof of humanity, super quickly, like there are a lot of proofs around. I'm just trying to understand, like in a nutshell, and this is a question also for you, Kyle, but like, why kind of like proof of humanity today is kind of like essential for the ecosystem? Why kind of like we need that? And, how kind of like solution like could be password XYZ or ZK Pass kind of like enabling this need today?
Yeah, for sure. I think in digital spaces, we all want to start to form both reputation and trust around the people we're interacting with, right? Like Passport is fantastic when you don't care who the human is behind the wallet, but you want to know there actually is a human behind the wallet. And so in a world that is just sort of clamored with Sybil's sort of extreme airdrop farming, like if I'm building an application, I want to know that I'm working with real users and that I'm feeding those users, like solving a problem for those real users.
That's real, yes.
And the flip side to that too is like I want to make sure that I'm rewarding real users, not those who are just setting up to farm something and move on from my ecosystem after the fact. So in this particular world, having confidence that there's a real human behind that wallet, understanding the actions they're taking, the value they're creating, the problem you're solving for them is just critically important. But I don't need to know that it's Simon behind the wallet or that it's Joshua behind the wallet. I just care that there's a real person there that I can sort of reward and have participate in my ecosystem. So the way that we do this on Passport is there's kind of been proven some folks who worked on online voting systems back in the 1980s really focused on kind of these anti-Sybil measures. A gentleman named Brian Ford, a lot of the research showed there's kind of 4 primary ways, at least in voter systems, you can make sure there's a real human involved. One is KYC credentials, if you trust the government agency that's issuing them. The second is biometric. So what we talked about, like a thumbprint scan and some sort of passport, whatever that might be, or password, excuse me. The third is like a social or web of trust. So if Joshua says that Simon's a real human and I trust Joshua, then I can trust that Simon's a real human. And the fourth is in-person verification. Like we see this in some of the early voting still, and even in India. You dip your finger in the ink. It's very clear that you voted. You were there in person for that particular activity. So on the passport side, we've really tried to include proofs and ways for people to prove unique humanity across those 4 different areas. You can pick how you want to show up. You can decide ways that you want to prove your unique humanity. But what this does is this gives you the first sort of step in building trust and rapport with the community that you're accessing. So if you need a faucet or you're working on a test net, rather than just drain that faucet, folks can go through and prove that they're a real human and they're interested in participating in that ecosystem and access that faucet, as long as they can prove their humanity as well. So all the financial use cases, we've worked with a couple of DeFi platforms exploring eliminating swap fees for real humans. So allowing arbitrage bots to just sort of pay the swap fees that come across, but now offering incentives for real humans to participate and explore either new tokens, new ecosystems, and to swap for free ostensibly. So there's a lot that you can start to do with gas rebates. Like the list kind of goes on and on once you start to build in economic incentives catered towards real humans versus those who are just farming or Sybil attacking.
That's so cool what you're saying. I just want to say before you jump in, Joshua, but I was chatting with these guys from Gaia last week before DEF CON is happening. But it's all about kind of like also this AI agent, kind of like delegating also AI agents specifically if they require some kind of like proof of humanity. And I would say that even on Password XYZ, if you're required some specific kind of like you're required a specific like level of attestation, then your AI agent can start doing, for example, auto transaction sign-ins. I think that would be super good, especially for like games use case. Like we're speaking a lot about batch transaction or even kind of like automatic sign-ins. And I think, if you satisfy a specific like attestation level, your AI agent is automatically kind of like proven to do something. And I feel there is a lot of use case. But feel free, Joshua, sorry that I interrupt there, the flow maybe.
Yeah, in terms of like a Kyle said about like a proof of humanity, actually, that's I think, in terms of like the attestation side, you would be able to see POH would be the low hanging fruit. That's happening, and then actually we work with Simon a lot on kind of attestation side. So actually you are able to get the market sense about, okay, a lot of people want to do that. Why? It's because of I think POH proof of humanity would be, everybody needs that one, because we need to know who they are, who you airdrop your token to, right? You need to have a little bit of more understanding beyond just a wallet address. So that's kind of like we did a lot of cases on the POH. And another thing about what we are able to do is kind of like we are able to, the reason we are able to do, ZK Pass able to do like a POH is because we are able to kind of like converting any piece of data from the web, right? In any dimensions. You can say like identity related, like a passport information, or like a KYC, or even like a bank information, or credit, or even your housing related address, whatever you have. So you are able to bridge all those data, and the user in the Web3 space, they are building like a personal profile. And then, so that's kind of like what they are able to in any dimensions, actually. Yeah. So that's why we are working with a lot of projects, and each project's demand and the user's profile is different. Someone is a finance, someone is like a KYC related, someone is like a school, like an education type, or like a credit system, or something like that. Yeah, I think this is kind of like the PLH would be the low hanging fruit for the whole space. You have to have that in order to build some business on top of that. Yeah.
That's actually super exciting. And I wanted to chime in on ZK TLS, but I think it's also like super like useful to have something like, you know, like your linear profile on ENS, and you literally have your kind of like your full identity attached to kind of like this profile. And kind of like important, I think, like to whoever is listening to this and is building technology on top of this, is like really like we need to think about also like the UX on the and the UI on the users, right? How actually like the process. And I think like on the linear side, we're thinking a lot about that, and maybe Simon, you can chime in, but like really like how everybody's claiming their kind of like, you know, could be your linear ENS handle, and from that you're running through all the kind of like proof of humanity side with the Substack. But I actually want to deep dive a little bit more on the optionality on proof of humanity, the methods versus the Sybil thresholds. Like I don't know, like I know, like Simon, you're a big fan of that, like, you know, more option, more Sybils. You want to kind of like touch a little bit on this, and maybe just give a little bit context. What are kind of like the two things, or how? I mean, we touched on proof of humanity, but how this will be compared Sybil thresholds.
I mean, that's a great question. It goes back to when we were first thinking about proof of humanity, and like the feedback we were getting is that there is no one size fits all method for proving you're human, and like different people have different journeys in Web3, and so different methods suit, you know, where they're coming from. So for example, some people who are maybe new to Web3 don't have a huge on-chain footprint that they can leverage to prove they're human. Other people may not, for whatever reason, be able to do KYC, or are just uncomfortable doing KYC. And then some people are kind of very, very uncomfortable around biometrics, for example. Web of Trust suits some people, and they have a huge social graph they can leverage, but for other people, they don't. So we were trying to give people as much optionality as possible so that we could, you know, be flexible and, you know, allow everybody to have like, to avail of proof of humanity using the methods they prefer. And I think we succeeded, but it wasn't without its challenges. You know, it is very difficult because on a very simplistic level, the more options you give people to prove they're human, the more the ability they have to Sybil. So if there's like 5 different ways of proving you're human, you can show up with 5 different wallets and use each method individually, and all of a sudden you're 5 people. So that's why we kind of structured the proof of humanity the way we did. We think now, like a year later or so, there's definitely, we can see ways to refine it and make it more user friendly, but the challenge is still there. And depending on the use case, you know, developers might be okay if there's no bots, but maybe there's like a couple of Sybils. That's, you know, that's acceptable. For other use cases, they have to be absolutely 100% certain that every person is unique. I think this is something that probably, Kyle, you guys have probably faced this on Passport XYZ, and I think you've taken a similar approach to Verax, especially when it comes to like, you know, the KYC type stamps have very high scores. I think they're like 16 or something, which gets you all the way to proof of humanity. So I'm wondering, like, what's your take on this?
Very much would echo just user choice. Like, once again, putting power back into users' hands and the information they share was why Passport is an aggregator across. I think removing friction, or like removing the need for someone to do something net new to prove unique humanity is also valuable. For the large portion of the US population, they have had to KYC with Coinbase. That's kind of the preferred on-ramp and off-ramp. For a large portion of like European citizens, Binance is another one that you've had to KYC with. So leveraging the tools and the places that folks have already sort of begun their journey both on and off ramping makes a lot of sense. We're exploring adding OKX as well to cover much of sort of the Asia region, because we know that's arguably one of the most popular wallets out there. Their KYC details and access to that are not as robust as both Binance and Coinbase right now. But I'm 100% with you. Like, I think the more that we can do to continue to put sort of this concept of reputation and identity into the hands of users, make that sovereign, make that something they can own and they can decide how it's shared and where they use that resonates. And you're right that the KYC components are very high signals, assuming we trust Coinbase, Binance, and Holonym as another provider that does cover a lot of the places that Coinbase and Binance don't. Or biometrics, so liveness checks. And then you can kind of piece together your score on Passport, proving you're a unique human based on on-chain activity, based on other socials you have, and things like that. So we really love the ZK-TLS solutions, what ZK Pass is doing. We've seen some friction with having to add a new Chrome extension and get set up with that workflow if users are brand new to it. But once it's in place, it's a fantastic tool as well, and just verifying a lot of the Web2 credentials. So ultimately, like I said, we want to make sure that on the Passport side, we give the power back to sort of users in deciding how they want to verify themselves. But then try and make sure that communities can still trust that the users who are showing up have been appropriately verified, even if it's in a way that they might not have expected previously.
Any specific like use case or kind of vertical that you see this driving more? Like I mentioned before, gaming, right? But maybe you see some other kind of interesting like driving sectors.
Yeah, I think gaming's an interesting one. Anytime that you have sort of an attention economy or something that's very easy to farm is usually a great place to add like a proof of humanity. And so the software solution that Passport is, we see it implemented very often on faucets, test nets, things that are just easy to sort of script or bot for people to participate in, or in community interactions. So gaming is a spot that I would expect that to continue to increase. But like Eskander mentioned, like your reputation of like your gaming reputation is a thing that you start to accrue based on time played, achievements in game. And so having humanity proofs in that space once you hit some echelon of gaming reputation, I think is less critical. Getting early access to Axes, for example, like Axie Infinity was a game that you had to buy those particular Axes to play. They explored proof of humanity to help offset that cost for folks early on, but was just very challenging given the scale that they were sort of approaching this with. So how can you sort of incentivize users to participate in this ecosystem in ways that doesn't require financial sort of cost? Like you don't want your users to have to pay to participate in the beginning. Perhaps you can offset that cost if you prove they're real humans, but then the rewards that they earn are things that they can turn around and sell themselves and sort of build a gaming economy, build a creator economy around.
Super cool.
Yeah, I kind of want to circle back a little bit to like when we were talking about agents identity and like all these use cases. I think I'm like a huge agent bull because assuming some improvement in performance, it's really easy to see them taking on some of these interactions that today are the barrier, right? Like we're talking about like how if you want your gaming identity to become composable, well, it requires you to put in a lot of time. It requires you to have expertise and then bring that history with you somewhere else. And like that thing for a human to bring at a technology level is actually quite complicated. So I think the idea that like you can do stuff, agents can do stuff on your behalf, and that actually makes your identity more composable because like the agent is able to interact with the UX layer ideally in like a more deterministic way than you as the like user can is actually really compelling. And one thing at ENS, like we're working right now on a proof of humanity DID. It's just super general. So any proof of humanity, provider can plug can plug right in via this standard. And then thing we want to look into after that is like proof of agent or proof of AI, right? Like how do you attest that some entity taking an action on chain is a person or a person's agent? And something we're seeing is that namespaces, one way you could think about ENS is like namespaces as a service, where you can like get your top level domain, then you can spin up a ton of subdomains underneath and set up any sort of logic around those. And so if you think about it as like a namespace as a service, you see that these things map really well to like the things that you want in large scale agent economies. You want composability, you want hierarchy, you want like the cross-chain, multi-chain resolution, and you want to be able to spin these up and spin them down, potentially really fast, right? Which you get all of these things natively, kind of like with ENS. So we're seeing that there's a lot of people starting to like develop these types of use cases. And one of the questions they have tends to be like, well, how do I know, what was the agent, in this namespace and what was a user, or like these types of questions. And then, the perpetual person that's always like, well, what about my taxes? So when your identity, starts to become you and like a workforce below you of these agents, like how do you make that differentiation? So, I think like one of the cool things about identity as a space, it's like all these latest like technical innovations or like, verticals that are starting to really emerge, things like agents, they all really tie well into identity. And I think it's just like really bullish for like people being able to move between digital spaces and the real world, with less friction, which at the end of the day is what all of this is about.
Yeah, I think this is definitely where we're going. And also, like, there are a bunch of comments, Skander, ENS for everyone. I love, like, I'm learning always so much about you guys are gigabrain in the space and learning also a lot of like, where we are, kind of where we're going, the difference between specific like, discussions. I think we're almost on time. I just want to do some kind of closing words. What kind of like for anybody, like for anyone, where kind of like you see things are going next in terms of like, could be stuff like, where you see the space that need to go in order to be shaped, and what you guys are like planning to ship for your respective like kind of like products. Do we want to start? Maybe Simon, I know like you're excited also about everything Verax related, Linea kind of like identity. We're working on different things. You kind of like wanna touch on specific things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we want to make easier for users, and this is something Kyle alluded to, is tapping into existing attestations and existing kind of ways that people have already proved that they're human. We're in a different place now than we were 12 to 18 months ago when people were setting up all of this stuff. Now you've got like Binance KYC attestations, you've got Coinbase KYC attestation, you've got Verax, millions and millions of attestations across the ecosystem, not to mention Passport.xyz that we can tap into almost seamlessly behind the scenes, which is really exciting. So I think from a user experience, there's going to be less friction and it's going to be much more easier to access things. Going forward, the one thing that I really have my eye on though is privacy, and the first challenge was getting data on chain where there was none and allowing developers and apps to really easily access that data, and we're making great progress there. Now the problem is going to have too much data on chain, and so how do we use things like the stuff that zkPass is doing, other zero knowledge proofs, stuff like stealth addresses like Umbra and Railgun and all of those really cool protocols, in a way that people can continue to put data on chain and unlock value from it, but in a way that doesn't completely dox everything about them permanently.
Yeah, this is why we need to speak more about these trade-offs, kind of like what need to go on chain in terms of reputation, what can stay off chain, like what's the strategy there. And it's all depend also, like, I think on the use case specific. Cool. Kyle, you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll just do sort of forward looking. I personally am most excited for a lot of what's happening with account abstraction, wallet technology, some of the like the multi-party, two-party computes, and like verification mechanisms. We talked a little bit about it on the discussion so far. a password and your thumbprint or some sort of liveness check or some sort of social component added in. This concept of creating human keys, like things that are derived from humans themselves and are easy to restore, I think is going to be great. So seeing just so many of these, wallets as a service, wallets as a protocol, the wallet tech, I think, is going to help just kind of bridge that gap for folks, especially if there's ways that the wallet tech can store fees for gas, like can store tokens for gas and pay gas in USDC or USDT or other things instead of just ETH or whatever a native network requires. Um, as far as Passport's concerned, where we're headed, we're definitely keeping an eye on the wallet space and sort of understanding how that's evolving. Because whether that DID lives on your ENS, whether that DID lives in Ceramic, whether that sort of attestations in Verax, we feel like the connective tissue between all those things is going to what's sort of make this experience whole. And for us, I think just continuing to reduce user friction and proving unique humanity. So we've got a lot of work we're doing to help make the Passport experience embeddable on other users, other dApps. So now you can verify your passport directly in Verax, perhaps, and you don't even have to go to Passport XYZ to do that. Just thinking about, React components and being able to add that in the same way that folks are used to just connecting a wallet. Immediately your passport score and your sort of proof of humanity is accessible anywhere you go as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think we don't have time, but I definitely want to speak more also about kind of like standards and frameworks, because I think also that's super important, because I think everybody would kind of build their own islands, and the question is who is kind of like taking care. But I mean, Passport XYZ and those kind of specific solutions, I think they're super valuable. Yeah, Joshua, you wanna close up?
Yeah, I can speak about ZKTLS. So basically, with ZKTLS, we see the gap between Web 2 and Web 3 is kind of merging, and also just like Kyle mentioned, like a wallet account abstractions, all these type of technology coming out, and then so Web 3 is kind of the experience would be much better, and then so this Web 2 and Web 3 is kind of, so we have some user cases, and they basically bridging those Web 2 features to Web 3 or Web 3 features back to Web 2. Is both are happening in terms of like the ZKTLS side. So it's more interesting is, okay, you are able to see a lot of like interesting data, which, beyond out of reach before. Now they are able to not real world assets or something, the financial side. Okay, you're able to see some data. Okay, even the Web 2 like agents, and they are using ZKTLS or using those Web 3 features to doing like Web 3 verifications now. So Web 2 verification more is like kind of like a paper based or something, like they keep doing that. And then when they heard about ZKTLS, okay, they're able to verify something, and also meanwhile they are able to protect the privacy. So they're kind of excited about this. And we do have some like a problem facing. Number one is how to make them, especially the Web 2 guys and the big financial guys, how to believe in the technology and push for the mass adoption. I think that's one question we are facing. That's number one. I think number two would be with a lot of data or a lot of proofs, is unlimited actually. Proofs came out from Web 2 space. It will be up to us or the user cases to design a really good kind of like a user, like a interesting like a user cases, I would say, just to push for the adoption. Right now, I think even on the proof of humanity side, this is kind of a no hanging fruit, but it's kind of if we're talking about like the user base, I think it's compared to Web 2 doesn't really stay in the early stage. So I think the second challenge would be, okay, with all bunch of the info right now, I think it's getting there. It's up to us to kind of for the whole space to came up with some killer apps or killer user cases, okay, which make the both space Web 2 and Web 3 excited about that. I think that's the challenge we are facing. And the third one, I think, is kind of like I'm really happy to see, okay, a lot of user cases have been building on top of ZKTLS now. Even ZKTLS we have already have 30 plus like use cases are finished, and then we have like 50 plus in talks. So these are the kind of the use cases came out from earning like a lot of like industries expanding from Web 2 or Web 3. So that's something we kind of like interesting about. And then in the short time span, I would say, okay, we are pushing for more user cases in the space, POH, in the financial space, and then proof of humanity, all these type of things coming up. I think that's kind of excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can go quick. So on my end, really excited about like being able to develop additional standards. I know that sounds lame, but it's like you get a lot of like development that gets juiced when like everybody can kind of like agree on a standard. So it makes things much simpler for developers. And I think the identity space, specifically around attestations, is hard, where there's like lots of different like attestation systems and stuff, and they don't necessarily. I think that's like a lot for the space, that we don't kind of have like this interoperability by default. And then like what we're working on, ENS is working on a project we call ENS v2. It's basically rewriting the protocol from the ground up based on everything we've learned over the last 7 years. And then phase 2 is like extending that protocol to a layer 2. And so if the ENS protocol is sitting in a layer 2 environment, and also has like a lot of these standards, it really opens up like the composability and how it gets referenced to like, I'm really excited to complete ENS v2, get standards in place so that ENS becomes, composable across everybody's applications.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited about hearing this V2. Also, like, when we will definitely like need to chat in DEF CON, and I think everybody will also be there. Simon had to drop. I think we're almost on time. I also want to say big thanks to everyone that was part in the backstage, helping out and coordinating this space. I think we definitely need to have more, like, let's say, attestation discussion about this, and kind of like also digesting all the specific kind of like work stream of debates that are happening. I think there is a lot of things and stuff like frameworks we didn't have time to actually like speak, or kind of like standardization around attestation. But I'm also like excited about stuff like, we're working also on the Linea side on a specific reward program. We have something called Life on Linea. So basically we have a weekly 2.5 ETH, I think, for specific like Linea contribution. And part of this is also like attestation use case. So people building specific DAD dApps that involving both Verax and enabling kind of like those public registry within Verax is actually something that we really deeply care about. But I think big thumbs up if everybody will be in DEF CON. I think everybody will be there. So feel free to reach out. Thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you so much, Kyle and Iskander. We definitely need to chat more, and maybe I will see you guys in Builder Nights. And yeah, so awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody that joined this space, this dynamic space. We definitely need to do this more, and I see you guys next. Cheers.
Awesome.